They say the Widow's Fork River is a killer. It's a churning silver beast that guards the secrets of the West, and the saying in Colorado Territory is simple: no one crosses that river twice. The first time, it might let you pass. The second time, it claims you. But when the mysterious Silas Vane, the only man Abigail Reed had ever seen who wasn't afraid, crossed it and vanished, she was left with a choice. Face the tyrant Hiram Blackwood, who was strangling her family's homestead, or follow the only man who could help her into the one place no one ever returns from. She chose the river. What she found on the other side wasn't just survival. It was a secret that would rewrite the map of the West. The town of Dry Hope was named by a man with a cruel sense of humor. It was a scar of gray-brown dust carved into the high plains of the Colorado Territory, a place where the wind never stopped screaming, and the dirt got into your food, your lungs, and your soul. For Abigail Reed, it was the only home she had ever known. She ran the small homestead on the edge of town with her father, Thomas, a man whose lungs were turning to dust, just like the land. Their lives were ruled by two unchangeable facts. The first was the land itself, hard and unforgiving. The second was Hiram Blackwood. Blackwood, owner of the sprawling Bar B Ranch, was a man who believed in a manifest destiny that started and ended with his own property line. He was choking Dry Hope one small homestead at a time. He bought the bank he owned the sheriff, and he was slowly, systematically damming the small creeks that fed the outlying farms. The Reed's place was next. "He's moving his line," Thomas wheezed one evening, staring at the fresh fence posts Blackwood's men had hammered in, stealing another 50 acres of their grazing land. "That's our land, Pa. The survey map proves it." Abigail said, her voice tight. She was 20, but she felt 50. Her hands were scarred from mending barbed wire, and her face was leathered by the sun. "The survey map is in the bank. The bank is owned by Mr. Blackwood. The law is Sheriff Brody. And Brody eats at Blackwood's table," Thomas said, a fit of coughing seizing him. The confrontation came 3 days later. Abigail was trying to haze their meager herd of 30 cattle toward what was left of the creek when 3 Bar B riders appeared on the ridge. They were led by Jedediah Jed Stone, a man with a face like a spoiled boot. "Morning, Miss Reed," Jed called, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "These cattle look lost. We're just going to push 'em back toward the Bar B for you. Mr. Blackwood's orders." "They're on Reed land, Jed. You know it," Abigail said, raising her father's old Winchester. Her hands were shaking, but she held it steady. Jed laughed. "That's a heavy rifle for a little girl. You best run on home. We'll handle this." He and his men spurred their horses, yipping, charging straight at the small herd, scattering them. "No!" Abigail screamed, firing a warning shot into the air. Jed's horse reared. His face went dark. "You've done it now, girl." He unhooked his lasso, his intent clear. He wasn't just after the cattle anymore. "That's enough." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind. A man stood 30 yards away. He'd come from the direction of the river, from the morning mist that clung to the willows. He was tall, dressed in worn buckskins that seemed out of place among the ranchers. He carried no visible pistol, only a long knife at his belt and a bow slung over his back. His eyes were a startling gray, and he looked at Jed Stone, not with anger but with a profound lack of fear. "Who in the hell are you?" Jed snarled. "This is Bar B business." "This is theft," the stranger said. He took one step forward. "Get him, boys," Jed yelled. The 2 other riders charged. The stranger didn't move until the first man was almost on him. Then, in a blur, he sidestepped the horse, grabbed the rider's arm, and used the man's own momentum to pull him from the saddle. The rider hit the ground with a sickening crunch. The second rider fumbled for his pistol, but the stranger had already snatched the fallen man's rifle, worked the lever, and fired. Not at the man, but at the pistol itself. The gun exploded in the rider's hand in a spray of splinters and metal. The man shrieked, clutching his ruined fingers. Jed Stone froze his hand halfway to his own holster. The stranger leveled the rifle at him. "Leave. Tell your boss the Reeds are not alone." Jed stared at the man's cold grey eyes, then at his two men, one groaning on the ground, the other cradling his hand. He saw something in the stranger that wasn't just a gunman. It was something wilder, something he didn't understand. He spat. "This ain't over, not by a long shot." He grabbed the reins of his injured man's horse and galloped away, leaving the first man to limp after them. The stranger ejected the shells from the rifle and handed it butt first back to Abigail. She was trembling. "My name is Silas Vane," he said. "Abigail Reed. I'm indebted to you." He nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "He'll be back, not today, but he will." Silas stayed for a week. He spoke little, but he worked with a silent, tireless efficiency. He mended the section of fence Jed's men had trampled. He showed Abigail how to track a deer, how to read the clouds. He moved with a grace she'd never seen, as if he were part of the land itself. He paid for his food and board with 2 small, strangely pure gold nuggets. They talked in the evenings, the only light from the fireplace. He asked about Blackwood, about the town, about the river. "The Widow's Fork," Thomas told him, his voice raspy. "A bad luck place, son. The Utes say it's a angry spirit. Folks who cross it, they get lost, or they find something worse. There's stories. Men go in, but they don't come out. And if they do, they're changed. Mad. No one crosses that river twice. The first time is to prove you can. The second time, the river keeps you." Silas just listened, his gaze fixed on the fire. Abigail found herself drawn to his quiet strength. He was the first person who had ever made her feel safe. "Where are you from, Silas? I've never seen you in Dry Hope." "My home is far from here, and hard to find," he said, his voice soft. "A place where men like Blackwood can't breathe." On the 7th morning, he was gone. Abigail ran to the ridge and saw him, a distant figure, on his horse, riding not toward Denver, not toward Santa Fe, but straight for the churning, misty banks of the Widow's Fork. He reached the rapids, and without a moment's hesitation, urged his horse into the torrent. The river swallowed him in the fog. Abigail felt a cold dread and a strange, aching loss. Silas Vane, the only man who could stand against Hiram Blackwood, had just crossed the river. No one crossed twice. A month passed. The cold grip of autumn tightened on the high plains. Silas Vane's intervention had bought the Reeds time, but it had also bought Hiram Blackwood's focused rage. The humiliation of Jed Stone was a debt Blackwood intended to collect. He didn't send riders. He sent lawyers. A man in a clean suit arrived from Denver, accompanied by Sheriff Brody, who wouldn't meet Abigail's eyes. The man presented papers, his voice slick and unfeeling. "Mr. Thomas Reed," he announced, "your loan from the First Bank of Dry Hope, secured against this property, has been found to be in default. The bank is foreclosing. Mr. Blackwood, as the bank's president, has generously offered to absorb the debt. In exchange, you will vacate the premises within 48 hours. "Default?" Thomas cried, rising from his chair. "We ain't missed a payment." "A clerical error seems to have misapplied your last 3 payments," the lawyer said with a thin smile. "It's all perfectly legal. You'll find Mr. Blackwood's signature here." "It's theft!" Abigail shouted, her hands clenched. "It's a lie, and you know it. You can take it up with the judge in Denver," Sheriff Brody muttered, dusting his hat. "But the train takes a week. By then this'll be Bar B land. I suggest you pack." They left. The legal theft was complete. That night, a cold, hard rain began to fall. Thomas's cough worsened, turning into a wet, rattling sound that terrified Abigail. They were ruined. They had nowhere to go. The other homesteaders were too scared of Blackwood to help. They would freeze or starve by winter. Abigail sat by the dying fire, the foreclosure notice crumpled in her fist. Blackwood had won. He had taken everything. Then her hand brushed against something in her pocket. It was a small, smooth piece of wood. She pulled it out. It was a bird intricately carved, no bigger than her thumb. Silas must have dropped it, or left it. She looked at it, the simple, beautiful thing. It was proof of a different world. A world where a man like Silas could exist. A place where men like Blackwood couldn't breathe. He had crossed the river. He had come from somewhere. The legend hammered in her mind. No one crosses that river twice. But Silas had only crossed once, and she hadn't crossed at all. "Pa!" she said, her voice quiet but fierce. Thomas looked up, his eyes weary. "Pa! I'm going to find him. I'm going to find Silas." "Abigail, no." Thomas struggled to sit up. "The river. It's a graveyard. You heard the stories. You'll die. That's what Blackwood wants. If I stay, we die." She counted, her eyes flashing. "He dammed the creek. He stole our land. He's left us with nothing. Silas. Silas is the only person who ever stopped him. He came from that river. Maybe the answer isn't in dry hope. Maybe it's across it." She made her decision with the certainty of the doomed. She packed what little food they had left, some dried jerky, a bag of cornmeal. She took her father's heavy coat and her Winchester. She wouldn't take a horse. A horse couldn't make the crossing and would only make noise. She would go on foot. "I'll move you to the old line shack by the cliffs," she told her father. "It's hidden. There's firewood. You'll be safe for a few days. I'll be back, Pa. I promise. I'll be back with help." It took her half the night to move her father, to make him as comfortable as possible in the cold one-room shack. He was weak, feverish, and he begged her not to go. She kissed his forehead, her heart breaking. "I have to." She reached the Widow's Fork at dawn. The river was swollen from the rain, a roaring, muddy torrent. The mist was so thick she couldn't see 10 feet. The sound was a physical blow, a constant, deafening roar. This was not a river. This was an ocean, angry and vertical. No one crosses twice. "I've only got to cross once," she whispered, her teeth chattering from cold and fear. She found a place where a great cottonwood had fallen, forming a partial bridge. She tied her rifle to her back and began to climb out over the raging water. The log was slick with spray. The current hammered it, making it tremble. She was halfway across when the river fought back. A massive uprooted tree trunk, a black battering ram in the grey water, slammed into the cottonwood. The log she was on snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. Abigail was thrown into the Widow's Fork. The cold was absolute. It was not water. It was ice needles and fists. It stole her breath, her sight, her sense of direction. She was pulled under, spun around her head, striking a rock. The world went black, then red. She was drowning. She fought, driven by the image of her father's face. Her heavy coat and boots were dragging her down. She clawed at the surface, her lungs burning. Her fingers snagged something, a root tangled in the bank. She clung to it, her knuckles white. With the last of her strength, she hauled herself out of the water. She collapsed on the muddy bank, vomiting river water, shaking so violently she thought she would break. She had no rifle, no food, no coat. The river had taken it all, but she was alive. She looked back. The mist-shrouded bank of dry hope was invisible. She was on the other side. She had made the first crossing. Abigail awoke to pain. Every muscle screamed. Her head throbbed where she'd hit the rock. She was caked in mud, and the air was bitingly cold. She had survived the river, but the land would kill her just as quickly. She was in a wasteland of shattered rock and thorny scrub. The river had thrown her far downstream from where she'd fallen in. The sky was a low, oppressive grey. She had no idea where Silas had gone, or if he'd even survived his own crossing. The hopelessness of her quest settled on her, as heavy and cold as her wet clothes. But the image of her father, sick and alone in the line shack, pushed her to her feet. She had to move, or she would die. She picked a direction away from the river and into the broken canyons that defined this forbidden land. The terrain was a nightmare. It wasn't flat plains. It was a maze of high-walled gulches and narrow passes. The rocks were sharp, cutting through her worn-out boots. She had no food, no water, and no weapon. By the second day, she was delirious. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The sun beat down, but the wind was icy. She stumbled, falling to her knees. This was it. This was how she died. This was why no one crossed the river. It wasn't just the water, it was the land. It was designed to kill. As she knelt, her vision blurring, her hand touched something. It wasn't rock. It was wood. She looked down. It was the carved bird. It must have been in her pocket the whole time, a small, solid piece of hope. She clutched it. It was a sign. Silas had been this way. She forced herself up. She walked for another hour, following a dry wash that cut deeper into the mountains. The wash twisted, and she saw something that made her stop. A wisp of smoke, thin and blue, rising from a crack in the canyon wall miles ahead. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. It took her the rest of the day to reach it. She was climbing a narrow goat path, her hands raw when she heard a sound. A soft thwack. An arrow buried itself in the dirt 2 inches from her foot. She froze. "Do not move," a voice commanded. 2 figures emerged from the rocks above her. They were not the Ute warriors she'd seen from a distance near Dry Hope. They were dressed in a strange mix of buckskin and settler's clothing. One was a young man with dark, braided hair and eyes as grey as Silas's. The other was a woman, perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair in a bun and a lined, strong face. She was holding a long rifle, and she held it with absolute confidence. "Who are you?" the woman demanded. "How did you cross the river?" "Please," Abigail rasped, holding up her empty hands. I'm looking for Silas. Silas Vane." The two exchanged a look. The woman's eyes narrowed. "You know Silas. He saved my father. I'm Abigail Reed, from Dry Hope. I need his help. A man named Blackwood." She was so weak her words dissolved into a dry cough. She collapsed. The last thing she saw before she blacked out was the woman's hard face, softening just for a moment with something like recognition. When Abigail woke again, the world was different. She was warm. She was lying on a soft fur pelt. The air smelled of wood smoke and herbs. She was inside in a room that was half cave, half cabin. The walls were smooth plastered rock, painted with intricate designs of animals and stars. The older woman she'd seen was stirring a pot over a fire. "You're awake. Good. Drink this." She helped Abigail sit up and handed her a warm, bitter broth. It burned, but it sent strength flooding through her. Where am I?" "You're safe," the woman said. "My name is Sarah Jane. This is the Echo. Echo. This canyon. It protects us." Sarah Jane looked at her. "You said you knew Silas. He is my son." Abigail's heart leapt. "His mother. But you're white." Sarah Jane smiled a sad, brief expression. I was. A long time ago. I was Sarah Jane Hartwell, part of the Hartwell wagon train, 1845, the one that vanished, according to the papers in Denver. Abigail stared. The Hartwell party was a ghost story, a legend of 100 settlers who had disappeared without a trace. They were assumed to have been massacred. We were, Sarah Jane said, reading her expression, most of us, attacked by a Comanche war party. They hounded us for a week. We were lost, broken. Only a dozen of us were left, mostly women and children, when they found us. The people of the Echo, a small sept of Ute who had hidden in this canyon for generations, avoiding the wars of the plains. Their leader, Stone Talker, found us. We were starving. He did not see white women. He saw mothers. He saw survivors. He took you in. He took us in, Sarah Jane confirmed. We merged. We became one tribe. We built this, a new life hidden from the world, a world that only wanted to kill us. I married his son. Silas is my child. He is the bridge between our two pasts. A figure ducked into the doorway. It was Silas. His face was a mask of disbelief. Abigail! He rushed to her side. By God, I never... How the river? I had to, she whispered, her voice breaking. She gripped his hand. Silas, he's taking it all. Blackwood. He's taken the farm. Pa is sick. He'll die. I didn't know where else to go. I followed you. Silas closed his eyes, his knuckles white. The joy of seeing her was instantly replaced by a terrible cold dread. You crossed the river, he said, his voice flat. Yes, I survived. You don't understand, he said, looking at his mother. This place, its only protection is that it doesn't exist. It's a secret. No one who finds this place can ever leave. Abigail's blood ran cold. It's the law, Sarah Jane said, her voice full of sorrow. Our law, not yours. But it's what has kept us alive. No one crosses the river twice. They don't cross back, child. Because if they do, they bring the world of men like Hiram Blackwood with them. Abigail stared at him. She had escaped the river only to find herself in a beautiful, sunlit prison. For 3 days, Abigail healed. The people of the Echo Canyon were ghosts made real. They were not a tribe in the way the world outside would understand it. They were a hybrid, a fusion of two shattered peoples who had built a fortress of secrecy. There were perhaps 70 of them. The survivors of the Hartwell party, now old, had intermarried with the Ute band. Their children, like Silas, and their grandchildren, were a new generation that belonged to neither world. They lived in dwellings built straight into the cliff walls like the Anasazi before them, but their homes were furnished with rocking chairs from Ohio and Ute blankets. They grew corn beans and squash in irrigated terraces that captured the canyon's scarce water. Abigail was introduced to Stone Talker, the old patriarch. He was ancient, his face, a map of the canyons themselves. He looked at Abigail with eyes that held no malice, only a deep, profound weariness. You have brought the wind, he said, his voice like rocks grinding together. And the wind brings the fire. I meant no harm, Abigail pleaded. My father is dying. I only came for help. Help, Stone Talker mused. Your people's help is a bullet. Their friendship is a treaty, broken before the ink is dry. Your world is a storm. This canyon is the only rock that stands above the flood. A council was called. It was held in a large circular kiva dug into the canyon floor. Abigail sat next to Silas, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. She cannot stay, said a young warrior named Cale. He was the man who had shot the arrow at her feet. He was pure-blooded Ute, and he looked at Abigail with open suspicion. She is an outsider. She will miss her world. She will leave. She cannot leave, Sarah Jane countered, standing. That is the law. She crossed the river. She is one of us now, whether she wishes it or not. The only question is how we proceed. She speaks of a tyrant, Silas said, his voice ringing with an authority Abigail hadn't heard before. Hiram Blackwood, the same man who's been pushing his cattle closer to the river all year, the one who's been poisoning the water upstream. He is the storm Stone Talker speaks of. Then let the storm break, Kyle said. It has nothing to do with us. The river protects us. The river didn't protect us from her, Kyle shot back, gesturing at Abigail. She crossed. If she can, he can. A cold silence fell. He was right. Abigail's desperate act hadn't just endangered her. It had proven that the uncrossable river was in fact crossable. I won't tell anyone, Abigail said, her voice trembling. I swear it. I'll stay. I'll live here. But my father, please. He is all I have. He's sick. If I don't go back, he will die alone in that shack. The council was torn. To let her go back was to risk everything. To keep her was to condemn her father. There is another way, Silas said. We bring him here. The Kiva erupted. Bring another. Kyle was incredulous. You would risk all our lives for her sick old man. He is not a threat, Silas argued. He is an old, dying man. We can bring him here under cover of night. He can live his last days in peace. And Abigail, she will stay. She will give us her word. Her word, Kyle scoffed. Abigail stood. Her legs were still weak, but her voice was strong. My word is all I have. It's the only thing Blackwood couldn't take from me. I give it to you. I will not betray this place. But I will not abandon my father. Stone Talker raised a hand. The Kiva fell silent. The Hartwell blood is strong in you, he said to Abigail. You have the courage of your mother. He nodded to Sarah Jane. And the desperation of your father, he nodded to Abigail. It is a dangerous mix. He looked at Silas. My grandson, you are our bridge. You walk in their world to bring us salt and steel. You see the danger. If you believe this is the way, we will do it. But know this, if you bring this man, you bring his past. And the past has teeth. The council agreed. Silas would go. He would cross the river, his second crossing a violation of the tribe's most sacred taboo, to retrieve Thomas Reed. Kyle and 2 other warriors would go with him to protect him and to ensure the secret was kept. As they prepared, Sarah Jane took Abigail aside. You've done a terrible, brave thing, child, she said, clasping her hands. You forced our hand. For 30 years we have hidden. Now we must act. Silas has always been torn between my world and his father's. By coming here, you have forced him to choose. I just wanted to save my father, Abigail whispered. I know, Sarah Jane said. That's how it always starts. Love is the most dangerous thing in the world. It's what built this place, and it's the only thing that can destroy it. That night, Abigail watched as Silas Cale and 2 others slipped into the canyon darkness, heading for the river. She had found the help she was looking for, but she felt a new, colder fear. She had broken the law of the river, and she had forced Silas to do the same. No one crosses that river twice. Now the man she had followed, the man she was beginning to love, was doing just that. He was tempting to the river, and in doing so, he was tempting fate. The journey back was a tense, silent ordeal. Silas Kyle and the 2 warriors, Kai and Rona, crossed the Widow's Fork on a hidden, treacherous ridge of rock just below the surface, a secret ford that was only visible when the water was low. They moved like shadows, their Ute heritage, making them invisible on the land that had been their ancestors. They found the line shack. Thomas Reed was inside, delirious with fever, a weak fire guttering in the hearth. When he saw Silas, he thought he was a ghost. You came back," Thomas wheezed. "Abigail sent me," Silas said, gently lifting the old man. "We're taking you to safety. To her." "Abigail." "She crossed." "She's safe, Thomas. Come." The return was brutal. Carrying a sick man, even one as frail as Thomas, slowed them to a crawl. They had to time their crossing for the deepest part of the night. Kyle was nervous, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline. "We've been out too long," Kyle hissed. "The air smells wrong." "We're almost there," Silas said, shifting Thomas's weight. They reached the crossing and waded into the icy water. They were halfway across the current, tugging at them, when Rona, the rear guard, suddenly stiffened. "Riders," she whispered. On the ridge silhouetted against the rising moon were 3 men. Bar B riders. "They've seen us," Kyle said, knocking an arrow. "No," Silas commanded. "Don't shoot. The flash would give us away. Stay low, in the shadow of the rocks. Move! Now." They plunged into the deepest part of the channel, the water up to their chests, shielding Thomas from the current. The riders on the ridge stopped staring down at the churning water. They were clearly tracking someone. "He went this way," they heard one man yell. "Saw him from the ridge. Looked like he was carrying something." "Ain't nothing across there but death," another voice called. It was Jed Stone. "He's fish food. Let's go back. Blackwood said to scout the river, not swim it." The riders argued for another minute, then, deterred by the river's terrifying reputation, they turned and trotted away. Silas and his group scrambled onto the hidden shore, gasping. They were safe, but Silas was pale. "They didn't just see us," Silas said. "They saw where we crossed. They saw the ford." The news hit the Echo Canyon like a death knell. Abigail, overjoyed at seeing her father alive, felt her hope curdle. Thomas was brought to Sarah Jane, who immediately began treating his ravaged lungs with potent herbal steam. The council convened again, but this time the mood was not one of debate. It was one of war. "They will come," Stone Talker said, his voice grim. "The taboo is broken. The shield is cracked. We must fight," Kyle insisted. "We know these canyons. We will kill them as they enter." "They will come with 50 men," Sarah Jane said, her voice shaking. "Hiram Blackwood will not send a scouting party. He will send an army. They have repeating rifles. We have 30 arrows and a few old guns. We are farmers, not soldiers. We will be slaughtered. Our children—" Abigail looked at the faces in the kiva. She saw the Hartwell survivors, old men and women who had already lived through one massacre. She saw the Ute who had only known peace in this hidden place. "No," Abigail said, stepping forward. "You won't fight them like soldiers, because you're right. You'll lose. You have to fight them like him." All eyes turned to her. "Blackwood," she explained, her mind racing. "He's not a soldier either. He's a businessman, a bully. He's greedy, but he's a coward. His men are the same. They're paid thugs, not warriors. They're afraid of this land. They're afraid of the legends." "What are you saying?" Silas asked, watching her. "They believe the river is haunted. They believe this land is cursed. We have to make them believe it. Jed Stone already thinks Silas is a ghost. Let's show them the spirits." A plan began to form, born from Abigail's knowledge of her enemy and the tribe's knowledge of their home. They would not fight a pitched battle. They would not kill. "To kill them is to make them martyrs," Silas said, understanding her. "It will bring the U.S. Marshals. It will bring the cavalry. But to scare them, to break them, that will make them liars. No one will believe their stories, and Blackwood will not risk his fortune on a haunted canyon. They would use the canyon itself." The echo. Stone Talker pointed to the kiva wall. The high pass. It is the only way in. A box canyon, a trap. If they enter, they must exit the same way. We won't block the pass, Abigail said. We'll invite them in. We'll let them think they've found it. And then we'll use the echo. We'll use the rocks. We won't give them a fight. We'll give them a funeral. The tribe set to work. This was a different kind of war. They weren't sharpening spears. They were moving rocks. Young men and women, led by Cale, climbed to the high ridges above the narrowest part of the canyon pass. They spent 2 days rigging triggers, balancing massive boulders on precarious ledges, creating deadfalls. Sarah Jane and the older women prepared ghost bombs, small clay pots filled with dried herbs and sulfurous minerals from the hot springs. When thrown into a fire, they would explode with a terrifying screech and a cloud of choking, foul-smelled smoke. Abigail, Silas, and Stone Talker planned the performance. They would use the canyon's acoustics. Voices thrown from one side would sound like they were coming from all directions at once. They want this land, Silas said, his face hard, as he wedged a support timber under a 1,000-pound Widowmaker rock. We will let the land have them. Hiram Blackwood was not a patient man. When Jed Stone reported that he'd seen someone cross the Widow's Fork at a shallow ford, Blackwood was elated. The legends were lies, just as he'd suspected. That land, untouched and ripe, was his for the taking. He didn't care if it was a renegade Ute camp or a rival prospector. He was going to wipe it clean. He gathered 20 men. Not just bar B riders, but hard cases hired from Denver men who would kill for $1. He gave Jed Stone the lead. "I want that land, Jed," Blackwood said, standing on his porch. "Clear it. Burn whatever you find. I want it empty by the time the snow flies. And Jed, find the man who humiliated you. Bring me his head." Jed Stone rode with a savage grin. This wasn't just a job. It was revenge. They crossed the ford at dawn. The river was low and sluggish, and it gave them passage. They found the trail Silas's party had left. It led straight into the mouth of a narrow, high-walled canyon. "It's a trap," one of the Denver men grumbled, looking at the sheer rock walls. "It's a box," Jed sneered. "They're cornered. They got nowhere to run." "Come on." They rode into the canyon, a long column, 2 by 2. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the clop of their own horses, echoing strangely off the walls. "Where are they?" a rider whispered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud. They rounded a bend and found it. The hidden valley. They saw the cabins, the cliff dwellings, the green terraces. It was a paradise. "Look at that," Jed breathed, his eyes wide with greed. "It's all ours." They spurred their horses, charging into the small settlement. It was empty. Fires were still smoking. Food was on the tables. It was as if the inhabitants had vanished into thin air. "Spread out," Jed yelled. "Find 'em! They're hiding in the rocks." The men dismounted, spreading through the village, guns drawn. That's when the first sound hit. A low, deep moan like the world itself was in pain. It came from the rocks above. "Whoa!" "What was that?" a man yelped. "It's just the wind," Jed snarled. Then the voice came. It was Stone Talker, his voice amplified by the canyon, seeming to come from every direction at once. "You are not welcome. You have come to the land of the dead. Leave, or stay forever." "It's a trick!" Jed yelled, firing his pistol at the cliffs. The shot was deafening. It ricocheted, echoing 12 times. Crack, 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 crack. A high-pitched wail answered him. Rona and the other women, hidden in small caves using the acoustics. The sound was terrifying, inhuman. Then Silas gave the signal. From the top of the canyon, Kyle and his team cut the first rope. With a groan that shook the ground, a massive rock slide was unleashed. It wasn't aimed at the men. It was aimed at the canyon entrance. Thousands of tons of rock and shale poured down, sealing the pass. The boom echoed for a full minute. The way out was gone. Jed and his men stared in horror at the wall of rock that had just cut off their retreat. They're trapping us," one of the Denver men screamed, his bravado gone. "Stand and fight!" Jed roared, trying to regain control. That's when the ghost bombs hit the fires they'd found. The pots exploded. A foul, sulphurous yellow smoke filled the village. The screeching wails intensified. The men panicked. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. "The spirits!" one man shrieked, dropping his rifle. "The river spirits! They're real!" "It's a Ute trick," Jed bellowed, but his voice was shaking. "Then a Ute trick you will have," Silas's voice boomed from the cliffs. The second set of traps was sprung. Not boulders, but nets and snares. Men running in the smoke were suddenly hoisted into the air, tangled in ropes. Bolas thrown by unseen hands, wrapped around the legs of others, sending them crashing to the ground. It was chaos. Not a single shot was fired by the tribe. Not a single arrow was loosed. They were being defeated by ropes, rocks, and fear. Jed Stone, blinded by smoke and terror, ran for his horse. He climbed into the saddle just as Abigail stepped out from behind a dwelling. She wasn't holding a rifle. She was just standing there, her face calm. "You," Jed hissed, raising his pistol. "The girl. This is your doing." He pulled the trigger. Click. His gun was empty. He'd wasted his shots on the echoes. "You were warned, Jed," Abigail said, her voice clear in the mayhem. "You were told to stay away. Hiram Blackwood's greed means nothing here." Jed screamed inarticulately, a sound of pure rage, and spurred his horse directly at her. "Now, Silas!" Abigail yelled. Silas perched on a roof, pulled his own rope. A heavy cargo net designed to lift supplies swung down from a crane system. It caught Jed and his horse, sweeping them off the ground and slamming them into the side of a cabin. The horse, terrified, kicked and fought, but the net held. Jed Stone, the brutal foreman, was trussed up like a ham. The fighting was over. It had lasted less than 10 minutes. The smoke cleared. Jed's men were all captured. Some were dangling from trees, others tied to posts. Not one of them had so much as a scratch, but they were broken. They were crying, praying, begging for mercy from the ghosts of the canyon. Abigail Reed, the homesteader's daughter from Dry Hope, stood in the center of the village, surrounded by the silent, victorious people of the Echo. Hiram Blackwood sat on his porch for 2 days waiting. He expected to see smoke. He expected to hear a report of a successful, brutal extermination. On the 3rd day, he got his report. Jed Stone and his 19 men stumbled out of the morning fog on foot. They were stripped of their guns, their boots, and their horses. Their clothes were torn. They were covered in mud and yellow sulfur stains. Jed Stone's face was a mask of hollow-eyed terror. "What in God's name happened to you?" Blackwood demanded, rising from his chair. Jed fell to his knees on the porch. "It's cursed, Mr. Blackwood. The land. It's haunted." "Haunted? Get up, you fool. What happened?" "Spirits." "Yeah," one of the Denver men whispered, rocking back and forth. "The rocks. They came alive. The voices. They were everywhere. They sealed the canyon. They pulled us up into the sky." "We didn't see 'em," another man babbled. "Not really. Just smoke and screaming. The whole mountain came down on us." Jed looked up at his boss. His tough guy facade shattered. "We didn't lose a fight, Mr. Blackwood. There was no fight. It's their land. It's the land of the dead. They let us go. They told us to give you a message." "A message?" Blackwood said, his voice quiet. "They said, 'The spirits of the Widow's Fork have spoken. The land is guarded. Cross again, and the river will keep you. Forever.'" Hiram Blackwood looked at the 20 broken men at his feet. These were the hardest men he could find, and they were weeping like children. He looked toward the river at the wall of mist that now seemed to be watching him. Blackwood was a greedy man, but he was also a superstitious one. He could fight men. He could steal from homesteaders. But he could not fight a haunting. He had lost 20 men, 20 horses, and a fortune in rifles, all without a single body to show for it. It was a bad investment. He never sent another man toward the river. The legend of the Widow's Fork was no longer a quiet warning. It was a known, terrifying fact. The Barbee's property line stopped permanently at the river's edge. Back in the Echo Canyon, the tribe had gathered the captured weapons. Thomas Reed, sitting up and breathing the clear, medicated air of the Kiva, looked at his daughter. The dust in his lungs, as Sarah Jane had discovered, wasn't just dust. It was coal soot from the railway, and his body was healing slowly but surely in the clean air. "You found a new home, Abigail," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "We all have Pa," she said, squeezing his hand. Silas stood beside her. He took her hand. The law had been broken. Abigail had crossed, and she had not been imprisoned. She had saved them. "The council has spoken," Silas announced to her, a smile touching his lips for the first time. "The old law is dead. You are not a prisoner. You are a protector. This is your home if you will have it." Abigail looked at Sarah Jane, who was smiling. She looked at Stone Talker, who gave her a slow, respectful nod. She looked at Kyle, who was busy inspecting a new Winchester rifle, a grudging respect in his eyes. "I'll have it," Abigail said. She had followed Silas across a river no one was meant to cross. She was looking for help, for a weapon to fight a tyrant. But she hadn't found a weapon. She had found a tribe. She had found a family. And she had found a home, hidden in the heart of the canyons, protected not by fear, but by the wisdom of the land itself. The Widow's Fork still raged a silver boundary between two worlds. But now it wasn't a warning to stay out. It was a promise guaranteeing that the paradise behind it would remain a secret, kept not by a river, but by the courage of those who called it home. The great rock fall that had sealed the canyon pass became a new kind of monument. It was a scar that marked the end of their isolation and the beginning of their true security. In the weeks that followed, the Echo Canyon settled into a season of quiet change, the adrenaline of the ghost war fading into the rhythms of the coming winter. The 20 captured rifles, oiled and gleaming, were stored in the driest part of the Kiva. They were a strange, silent presence. Stone Talker would look at them, his old eyes thoughtful. "The world has come to us," he told Silas, "and we have found it wanting. But this is a power we must understand, not fear." It was Cale who took this to heart. His suspicion of Abigail had been burned away in the sulphurous smoke of her plan. He now saw her not as an omen, but as an asset. He sought her out one crisp morning, where she was helping Sarah Jane grind dried herbs. "Abigail," he said, his voice formal. He held out one of the captured Winchesters. "You know these, better than we do." Abigail looked up, surprised. "I know how to load one." "You know the men who use them," Kyle clarified. "That is more important. You will teach me, and I will teach you." A new partnership was formed. Kyle, the canyon's most gifted hunter, taught Abigail the way of the bow. He taught her how to move without a sound, how to read the scrape of a hoof on rock, how to feel the shift in the wind. In return, she taught him and the other young warriors about the world of men like Blackwood. She explained leverage property lines and the strange power of a signature on a piece of paper. A man like Blackwood, she explained, fears a lawsuit almost as much as a bullet, and he fears a ghost more than anything. They learned from each other, forging a mutual respect that solidified Abigail's place as a protector. She was the bridge just as Silas was, but in a different way. He bridged the blood. She bridged the mind. Her father, Thomas, healed. The clean, dry air of the high desert, combined with Sarah Jane's herbal steams, worked a magic the doctors in Dry Hope never could. The rattle in his chest vanished. Colour returned to his face. He spent his days sitting in the sun, talking with the other survivors, the old men and women who remembered wagons and the long trek west. He found a kinship with Sarah Jane, two souls who had lost one world and found another. "I never thought to see her happy," Thomas told Sarah Jane one afternoon, watching Abigail train with Cale on the canyon floor. "I thought I'd failed her. That land, it was a prison. I just didn't know it." "This land is a prison too, of a kind," Sarah Jane said softly. "But the walls are ones we built. We are not trapped in. We are kept safe." "She's safe," Thomas agreed, a tear rolling down his weathered cheek. "That's all a father wants. She's finally safe." As the first snows dusted the high peaks, Abigail and Silas found their own quiet. The crisis had thrown them together, a matter of survival. The peace that followed allowed them to find each other. He found her one evening standing on the cliff's edge, looking down at the river ford now hidden by the season's early mist. He stood beside her, the silence comfortable between them. "You're not looking back," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Abigail said. "I was just remembering. I was so afraid of that water. I thought it was the end of everything, but it was a door. You were brave. Braver than anyone I know." "I was desperate," she countered. "Desperation just looks like bravery from a distance." Silas smiled. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, intricately carved object. It wasn't a bird like the one she'd found. It was a wolf, its head raised, as if listening to an echo. "The wolf," he said, placing it in her hand, "is the hunter. But it is also the protector of the pack. It knows the land. It knows its family. It does not fight unless it must, but when it does, it fights to protect." He closed her fingers over the carving. "You are of the echo now, Abigail Reed. My mother sees you as a daughter. My grandfather sees you as a guardian. And I," he paused, his grey eyes searching her face, "I see you as the other half of the echo, the voice that answered when I called." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and clutched the small wooden wolf. They stood together, watching the mist obscure the old world. She was no longer the girl from Dry Hope, a victim of a rich man's greed. She was a woman of the canyon, a protector, a survivor. She had crossed the river twice once, in desperation, and now forever in belonging. She was home. And that's the story of how one woman's desperate choice rewrote the rules of the Wild West. Abigail Reed didn't just cross a river, she crossed a boundary between the world of greed and the world of survival. She proved that the greatest weapon isn't a rifle, but the land itself, and the courage to protect what you love. The Echo Canyon remained hidden, a secret paradise, saved by the very legends that were meant to make it feared. What did you think of Abigail's plan? Was it true courage, or a desperate gamble? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These are the kinds of stories that prove history is full of hidden heroes. If you loved this journey, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a great story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas from the West. Thank you for listening.